All right, so today we're going deep on this thing called Hate's Moral Foundations Theory. Tons of you have sent us material on this, and it really seems like you're all grappling with, this crazy political divide we're stuck in right now.
Yeah, I'd say you're spot on there. It can feel like everyone's just speaking a totally different language.
Right, like everyone's shouting, but nobody's actually listening.
Yeah.
So is this hate guy like offering some kind of, you know, a decoder ring for all this moral disagreement?
Hey, that's a pretty good analogy. Hate basically argues that we often miss what's really driving these disagreements. We think it's all about logic and reason, but honestly, it's more about gut feelings. Our intuitions are really calling the shots.
Whoa, okay, that's pretty wild. So it's not that people are being illogical. It's more like they're just following a different internal compass.
You got it. It's like we each have these moral taste receptors, but they're tuned differently based on how we grew up, our experiences, values, all that. Hate calls these the six moral foundations.
6 moral foundations. Like 6 different ways of seeing the world morally. That's really interesting. Can you break those down for us?
Absolutely. First up, we have care harm. It's all about compassion, protecting others from suffering. Think about how you react when you see someone in pain. That's the foundation kicking in.
Right, like that instant feeling of this is wrong when someone's being hurt.
Exactly. Then there's fairness cheating. It's all about justice, making sure things are reciprocal, everyone gets what they deserve. You see it when someone cuts in line, or there's unfair labor practices, people get angry.
So it's not just about personal harm, but a sense of what's right and wrong in how others are treated.
Totally. And then we have loyalty betrayal. This one's focused on the bonds we have with our groups, family, our country, even like sports teams. It's that feeling of belonging, being part of something bigger.
Oh yeah, I can see how this one gets really intense,
Mm-hmm.
especially these days when group identity is such a big deal.
For sure. Then we've got authority subversion, rooted in respect for traditions, institutions, hierarchies, all that. Helps us figure out social structures, who deserves our respect.
So like respecting your elders or following laws because they represent a structure you believe in.
Yep, great example. Now, this next one might surprise you. It's sanctity degradation. This one taps into our sense of what's sacred, pure, worthy of reverence versus what's disgusting or wrong.
Hmm. So is this like a religious thing? Or does it go beyond that?
It's definitely got roots in religion, but it's bigger than that. Think of the awe you feel in a beautiful cathedral or the disgust at something you think is deeply wrong.
Okay, yeah, I get it. It's like a sense of something being inviolable, almost untouchable.
You got it. And finally, we have liberty oppression. This one's all about resisting being controlled and fighting for freedom for ourselves and others. It's what pushes us to stand up to bullies and challenge systems that are oppressive.
Yeah, it's that urge to break free from anything that feels unjust, you know?
Oh.
Okay, so this is where we get to the political divide, right? How do these moral compasses play out differently?
Well, liberals tend to really put care and fairness first. It's all about helping those who are struggling and making a world that's more just, more equal. It's what drives them to fight for policies that protect the vulnerable and push for social justice.
That makes sense. I've noticed how conversations about inequality get really heated. And I guess those care and fairness foundations are at the heart of it all.
Exactly. Now, conservatives, they tend to see value in all six foundations. They really emphasize things like loyalty to their group, respecting authority, keeping traditions alive, and social order. This can lead them to focus on stuff like national security, traditional families, religious values.
So conservatives do care about fairness and compassion. It's more that they're balancing those with other moral priorities.
That's a good way to put it. And this difference in emphasis is what leads to those frustrating conversations where it feels like people are talking past each other. It's like they're speaking different moral languages,
Yeah. So how can we use this theory to actually bridge the divide? I mean, understanding why people disagree is one thing, but is there a way to use this knowledge to actually talk to each other better?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question. There's no easy fix.
Huh?
But understanding these foundations is a good start. It helps us take a step back from those arguments and realize that the other person, they're not necessarily being illogical or mean. They're just coming from a different set of moral priorities.
So instead of assuming they're wrong or bad, we try to understand where they're coming from morally.
Exactly. Once you understand their moral language, you can frame your arguments in a way that resonates with their values. Like if someone really values authority, you might emphasize respecting the law or upholding traditions. Or if they prioritize liberty, you could focus on how a policy restricts individual freedoms.
That's interesting. It's like learning to speak someone else's language. So you can actually get your ideas across in a way they understand.
Perfect analogy. It's not about changing your own values or compromising your beliefs. It's about finding that common ground where you can connect on a moral level.
So it's more about building bridges than winning arguments.
Precisely. And here's another important thing. Haight says all these foundations actually serve a purpose. They've evolved over time to help humans survive and thrive in groups. So even if we don't agree with every moral perspective, we have to recognize that each foundation brings something valuable to the table.
That's a good point. It's easy to dismiss the views we disagree with,
Yeah.
but maybe it's more helpful to try and understand why they exist and what purpose they serve.
Exactly. And that leads us to another idea from Haight, moral capital. He describes it as the fund of shared values, norms, and trust that makes cooperation possible in a society.
Moral capital, huh? So it's like the glue that holds society together.
You got it. And Haight believes that our current political climate, with all the polarization and lack of civil discourse, is a sign that our moral capital is being depleted. And he suggests that this makes it harder to solve problems together, to trust each other, even to function as a society.
Yeah, that's a little, well, that's kind of scary to think about. If we're losing that moral capital, that shared foundation, is there anything we can do to rebuild it?
That's the big question, isn't it? And Haight doesn't give us easy answers, but I think just understanding these moral foundations is a good first step. It lets us see the world through these different moral lenses and helps us see that people with different values aren't automatically the enemy.
So it's about moving past that us versus them thing that's everywhere these days.
Exactly. We have to recognize that we're all human, and
Yeah.
we all want what we think is best for ourselves, our families, and our communities. We might disagree on what that best looks like, but realizing we have that in common can be a powerful place to start a conversation.
Okay, so if we're trying to rebuild that moral capital, what does that actually look like, day to day? How do we apply this theory?
Well, I think it starts with listening, really listening to understand what the other person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk. When you go into a conversation really wanting to understand the other person's point of view, that's when you can find common ground.
So instead of just waiting to speak, we try to see things through their moral lens.
Exactly. And that's not always easy, especially when we feel strongly about something. But it's super important if we want to get past all these divisive arguments and start building bridges.
And I imagine this applies to more than just big political debates, right? What about those everyday disagreements with people who see things differently?
Absolutely. It could be anything. Arguing with your family about a social issue or debating a work policy with a coworker. The key is to remember that a lot of these disagreements come from different moral priorities. And if you understand those priorities, you can have those conversations with more empathy and respect.
So it's like we're all walking around with these different moral compasses, and sometimes they point us in different directions. But if we can learn to understand and appreciate those different directions, maybe we can figure out how to navigate this crazy world together.
That's a great way to put it. And at the end of the day, that's what this theory offers us. It gives us a way to understand ourselves and each other better, and a place to start building a society that's more compassionate and connected.
I love that. So to everyone listening, the next time you're in a heated debate, take a second and think about the moral foundations at play. What values are really driving that disagreement? Can you find a way to connect with the other person on that moral level, even if you don't agree with their conclusion? Remember, understanding leads to empathy, and empathy helps us build those bridges.